There is an ancient secret, silenced for centuries, considered too dangerous to be taught openly. It is a knowledge that, when accessed, activates a mental state capable of transcending the common limits of intelligence. We aren't talking about memorization tricks or superficial productivity methods, but about a hidden portal to what Carl Jung called psychic totality, a point where the rational mind and the unconscious join to unleash true human potential. This secret was banned, not because it was ineffective, but because it was too powerful for a world living in fear. Today, we reveal how this lost key can unlock a supergenius mind, and why you may have been conditioned to never seek it. If you are ready to break the chains of the limited mind, comment below. I choose to awaken my limitless mind. Carl Jung believed that human beings are a totality in potential, yet fragmented in everyday reality. The banned secret that unlocks a supergenius mind is not external to us. It is buried deep within the unconscious. Jung taught that the human mind carries repressed content, forgotten archetypes, and a self greater than the ego could ever imagine. The journey to access this elevated state of intelligence begins with the integration of the shadow, everything we have been conditioned to reject, but which holds latent creative power. Our genius is not born only with superior cognitive capacity. He is the one who dares to individuate, becoming who he truly is, beyond social masks. By integrating internal opposites, the masculine and the feminine, the conscious and the unconscious, the individual draws closer to the self, the organizing core of the psyche. In this process, what we call a supergenius mind is nothing more than the pure expression of an aligned psyche, free from the conflicts that drain psychic energy and divert creative focus. Projection, one of the main defense mechanisms of the ego, traps the individual in limiting narratives. When we remove these projections and face our internal truth, we unlock an almost infinite source of insight and originality. Jung reminds us that true intelligence lies in the dialogue between the ego and the unconscious, not in one dominating the other. Thus, the secret is not technical, but symbolic. It demands courage to dive into the unknown and integrate totality. It is this inner alchemy that unlocks a mind that sees beyond the obvious, creates with depth, and comprehends reality with astonishing clarity. Within Jungian psychology, the archetype of the genius is not merely an external ideal or a historical figure of great intellectual achievements. It is a living structure present in the collective unconscious, accessible to anyone willing to confront their own inner depths. The genius is above all a symbol of manifested psychic totality, a mind in dialogue with mystery, a being that transcends social norms by committing to personal truth, no matter how disturbing it may be. But there is a price to awaken this archetype, descending into the dark regions of the psyche. Jung was incisive in stating that enlightenment is not achieved by imagining figures of light, but by making the inner darkness conscious. And it is in that darkness, the shadow, that repressed power lies, the creative energy banished, the vital impulse denied in the name of social acceptance, family conditioning, or imposed morality. The secret that unlocks the supergenius mind is precisely there, the courage to confront one's own shadow. According to Jung, the shadow is composed of everything the ego rejects, yet continues to exist in the unconscious. It may contain traces of aggression, sexual impulses, repressed ambitions, unexplored talents, childhood traumas, and even buried spiritual aspects. Culture, with its drive for normalization, often treats the genius as someone dangerous, subversive, and unstable. And not without reason. The true genius challenges the status quo because he reintegrates what society taught us to separate. He rescues the shadow and transforms it into creative light. This is why the banned secret is linked to the taboo of looking inward. From an early age, we are trained to avoid self-confrontation. We prefer to project our flaws onto others, blame the external world for our limitations, idealize authority figures, and follow pre-established patterns. But the archetype of the genius only manifests when the individual breaks free from these projections and embarks on the journey of self-knowledge. He stops seeking answers externally and turns radically inward. By embracing the shadow, one unleashes a powerful creative energy previously used to maintain repressions and defense mechanisms. This psychological movement requires brutal honesty and, at the same time, deep self-compassion. The genius is not free of flaws. He is the one who has learned to integrate his shortcomings into his greatness. He transcends the simplistic duality of right and wrong, good and evil, and lives the complex reality of being human in its entirety. This integration is not a one-time event, but a continuous process. Each layer of the shadow that emerges reveals a new dimension of power. The individual begins to see that social rejection, fear of failure, or feelings of inadequacy are not signs of weakness, but valuable clues on the path of differentiation. In this sense, the genius is not the one who dominates others, but the one who has mastered himself, tamed the inner chaos, and put it at the service of creation. The relationship with the shadow also demands the deconstruction of an inflated ego. Many who seek genius want only recognition, status, or brilliance. But the true genius recognizes that power does not lie in being admired, but in being authentic. And to be authentic, one must be whole, which means accepting both light and darkness. Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming what one essentially is, not what others expected one to be. Therefore, the secret that unlocks a supergenius mind is less about acquiring something new and more about recovering what was lost, or worse, hidden from oneself. When the shadow ceases to be the enemy and is recognized as an ally, the mind expands radically. The individual begins to think not only with the intellect, but with the entirety of the psyche. It is then that original vision emerges, an intuitive connection with the invisible, the ability to see what no one else sees. It is this movement of descent and integration that awakens the archetype of the genius. It is not a gift, but an achievement, and it is available to all who have the courage to face their inner darkness, because it is there that gold is buried. Carl Jung identified something essential in the structure of the human psyche. The mind does not operate solely through logic, linear reasoning, and discursive thought. There exists a deeper, older type of intelligence that does not communicate in words, but through images, symbols, and myths. This is the symbolic mind, the true brain of the supergenius. Those who access and master this type of thought radically expand their field of perception, creativity, and understanding of reality. The symbolic mind is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. It allows complex, non-verbal ideas to be felt, intuited, and experienced even before they are understood rationally. It is through this symbolic language that the collective unconscious manifests, bringing forth archetypes, visions, and profound insights. Unlike the ordinary intellectual who merely processes data, the supergenius sees with his soul, and this vision is fueled by a practice that few comprehend, yet lies at the very core of the symbolic mind: hypervisualization. Hypervisualization is more than mere imagination. It is the activation of a sensory and emotional experience so vivid on the inner plane that it becomes almost real. Jung called this process active imagination, a technique for dialoguing with the contents of the unconscious, symbolically accessing regions of the psyche that the rational mind cannot reach. The supergenius uses this resource to anticipate ideas, build entire systems of thought, predict complex developments, and find solutions where others see only problems. Hypervisualization is not just a creative tool, it is a doorway to internal realities where time and space function differently. Through it, the individual comes into contact with mythic narratives, archetypal scenes, and symbolic representations of his own psychic life. A scientist who visualizes an equation functioning as a dynamic image, an artist who sees an entire work before creating it, or a strategist who anticipates complex scenarios with impressive clarity, all are accessing the symbolic mind through hypervisualization. This ability, although natural in every human being, is often stifled by excessive rationalism and standardized education that values memorization and repetition. We are trained to think in words and numbers, but not in inner images. Yet for Jung, the true language of the soul is symbolic. When we learn to listen to this language, the unconscious ceases to be a chaotic force and becomes a creative, transformative ally. The symbolic mind is also the source of true intuition. It is not about a hunch or a vague emotion, but about a silent knowing that emerges from the depths of the psyche. This knowing often arrives as an image, a scene that repeats in dreams, a symbol that appears frequently, a vivid visual sensation during deep meditation. The supergenius trusts this kind of perception because he has learned to decipher its language. He does not discard the irrational, he translates it. In this context, hypervisualization is not merely a mental exercise, but a way to integrate the conscious with the unconscious. The individual who practices it regularly develops the ability to build symbolic bridges between ideas, grasp hidden meanings, and associate seemingly disconnected concepts. It is this ability that gives rise to innovative discoveries, revolutionary theories, and transcendent works of art. The genius is the one who sees farther because he sees more deeply. Developing the symbolic mind requires inner silence, surrender to the unknown, and a willingness to dive into mystery. Hypervisualization cannot be forced like a mathematical calculation. It emerges when the ego makes space for vivid imagination, when unconscious contents take shape and find their voice. It is a process that demands presence, attention, and trust in the symbolic intelligence of the psyche. That is why the true band secret is not only in hidden knowledge, but in the way one accesses that knowledge. While most seek answers externally, the supergenius closes his eyes and looks inward. He navigates the symbolic ocean of the mind, uses hypervisualization as his helm, and returns to the surface with ideas that seem to come from another world, because in fact, they come from another layer of psychic reality. Awakening the symbolic mind is like igniting the divine spark that Jung identified as the self, the organizing center of the psyche. And when that spark lights up, the ordinary mind transforms into a beacon of genius, not because it learned something new, but because it finally remembered what it always knew. Carl Jung delved deeply into the symbolism of alchemy, not as a literal esoteric practice, but as a living metaphor for the process of psychic transformation. The idea of turning lead into gold, of sublimating raw matter into pure essence, is an exact representation of what happens within the psyche when an individual decides to confront his inner chaos instead of fleeing from it. In this context, the supergenius is not someone born with a perfect mind, but someone who has learned to transmute suffering, disorder, and conflict into clarity, power, and creative vision. Inner chaos, fears, contradictions, traumas, repressed impulses, is the raw material of the soul. Ignored, it consumes psychic energy, distorts perception, and sabotages focus. But when recognized and worked through, it becomes the fuel for transformation. Jung understood that chaotic states are not flaws to be corrected, but inevitable phases of a profound maturation cycle. It is in that liminal state, between the disintegration of the known and the emergence of the new, that the alchemical process begins. Psychic alchemy involves three essential moments: dissolution, confrontation, and integration. In the dissolution phase, the ego begins to destabilize, whether due to crisis, loss, emotional collapse, or simply an inner awakening that questions everything. This is the moment when old certainties dissolve, rigid patterns shatter, and the individual feels that control is lost. The ordinary mind fears this phase. The supergenius recognizes it as an opportunity. The second stage is confrontation. Here, the individual faces the forces that were repressed or unconscious. Symbolic dreams intensify, forgotten memories emerge, and painful truths assert themselves. Chaos is revealed as a mirror that demands the courage to look. It is a moment of intense pain, but also of revelation. The genius in formation does not flee this phase. It uses it as a psychic laboratory. Every emotion, every symbol, every crisis is decoded, understood, and put to work for growth. The third stage is integration. In this phase, the previously denied psychic fragments unite into a new configuration. The ego is no longer the controlling center, but a servant of a greater totality, the self. The individual emerges more whole, more lucid, and more capable of accessing expanded states of consciousness. What was once chaos transforms into clarity, and this clarity is not merely intellectual, it is experiential, intuitive, and powerful. The supergenius not only understands the world, he feels it on symbolic and energetic levels that transcend common logic. This process of transmutation demands surrender and presence. Psychic alchemy is neither linear nor predictable. It manifests through cycles, through internal spirals that revisit the same themes with increasing depth. The genius knows there are no shortcuts. He surrenders to the inner fire, knowing that it is in that symbolic heat that the gold of consciousness will be forged. Jung saw this process as sacred. He believed that the unconscious possesses its own intelligence, an organizing force that acts as the hidden alchemist within the psyche. When the ego opens up to this process, when it stops resisting and begins to cooperate, the individual aligns with something greater than himself. It is then that genius insights are born, improbable solutions emerge, and leaps of consciousness define an extraordinary mind. Many of history's greatest geniuses underwent intense alchemical processes, often without even being consciously aware of it. Van Gogh, Nietzsche, Leonardo da Vinci, Jung, they all faced periods of deep crisis that became catalysts for their genius. What set them apart was not the absence of chaos, but the way they used that chaos to expand their vision and creativity. The banned secret in this context is the wisdom that inner chaos is not a flaw to be corrected, but a raw material to be worked upon. Modern society, with its cult of performance, teaches us to hide suffering, numb pain, and accelerate without listening. The genius does the opposite. He slows down, listens, investigates. He enters his inner laboratory and transforms his darkness into light. And it is from that light that ideas that change the world are born. For Carl Jung, the true awakening of consciousness, and therefore of genius, comes through the integration of internal opposites. Among these opposites, few are as powerful as the anima and the animus, the archetypes of the feminine and the masculine present in every human psyche. What Jung proposed was revolutionary. The mind of a supergenius is not only intellectually sharp, but also internally balanced. It lives a symbolic marriage between the polarities of the soul. While most wage a war between reason and emotion, logic and intuition, action and contemplation, the genius builds bridges and operates from a unified center. The anima represents the feminine principle in the male psyche: sensitivity, intuition, nurturing, emotional depth, and connection with the unconscious. The animus, on the other hand, is the masculine principle in the female psyche: logic, mental clarity, discursive strength, focused action, and conceptual structure. When these aspects are not recognized and integrated, they act autonomously and in a self-sabotaging manner. A woman dominated by an unconscious animus may become rigid, verbally aggressive, and overly rational. A man dominated by an unintegrated anima may oscillate emotionally, becoming passive, insecure, or lost in idealizations. However, when the anima and animus are consciously embraced, a radical transformation occurs. The man gains refined emotional intelligence, a deep connection with intuition, and the ability to nurture ideas as if giving them life. The woman, in turn, integrates a sharp mental focus, the capacity to communicate with authority, act with presence, and build with clarity. Genius is born from that inner alchemy, from that symbolic union that does not deny opposites, but harmonizes them. This inner marriage, which Jung called hieros gamos, the sacred marriage, is the core of the individuation process. It does not mean nullifying one's sexual identity, but transcending the limitations imposed by a fragmented psyche. It is the moment when the self manifests with greater strength, reorganizing the entire personality around a more stable, broader, and more creative internal axis. The supergenius thinks with both reason and heart, creates with both hand and soul, acts with clarity and feels with depth. He is no longer imprisoned by extremes, he dances between them with mastery. This integration does not occur by chance. It requires internal work, active listening to dreams, observation of emotional patterns, and symbolic reflection. Often, the activation of the anima or animus happens through external figures that awaken these contents: a great love, a significant loss, or an identity crisis. Jung saw these events not as accidents, but as invitations from the psyche to reunite with the inner other. The common mistake is to project these figures onto the external world, trying to find completeness in relationships, ideas, or ideals. The genius recognizes the projection, gathers it, and transforms it into self-knowledge. By integrating the anima, the man stops fearing his emotions and begins to navigate them as though sailing a sea of wisdom. By integrating the animus, the woman ceases doubting her reason and expresses herself with inner authority. In both cases, the result is a mind operating in an expanded state. For instance, hypervisualization depends on surrendering to the anima. The conceptual articulation that transforms this vision into a work of art requires the animus. A mind that balances both is capable of imagining worlds and constructing them with precision. The banned secret is that we were taught to identify exclusively with one pole and to fear the other. We were internally separated, divided by a culture that assigns value to isolated characteristics. Either you are logical or intuitive, either you act or you feel. Jung breaks with this dichotomy and shows that totality lies in reconciliation. And it is this reconciliation that gives birth to genius, one who sees like few because he thinks with his heart and feels with his mind. This union of internal forces generates a broader vision of life. The supergenius is no longer someone chasing victory, but someone in search of meaning. He doesn't need to prove anything because he found within himself all the voices he once sought externally. He isn't half, he is whole. And it is from this wholeness that true genius is born, the kind that touches the world because it first touched the deepest layers of the soul. The banned secret that unlocks a supergenius mind was never locked away in secret books or hidden by occult societies. It has always been within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Jung taught that true transformation happens when we have the courage to descend into the depths of the psyche, confront the shadow, awaken the symbolic mind, perform inner alchemy, and integrate the opposites within us. This is the path of individuation and also of genius. It isn't about magical formulas, but about reuniting with what we have always been in essence. The supergenius is not a rare being. He is a living possibility, pulsating in all who dare to look inward. An awakened mind is not the fastest, but the most whole. And in that state, thinking becomes creating, feeling becomes understanding, and living becomes an act of continuous revelation. If this content has awakened something in you, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and leave your inner affirmation in the comments. And don't forget, click on the video on the screen now to continue your journey of self-discovery. Your transformation has already begun. The world needs your awakened genius.